Hi everyone, it's Paul here from Intro and Outro Video Productions with another Cafe Catch-Ups today with Dr. Melissa Bordogna. Melissa is an internationally renowned speaker, educator and also an award-winning learning designer. I'll be asking Melissa about the future of work and education. We'll be meeting at the Faircraven Cafe here on the Central Coast at Brisbane Waters, which is close to Gosford. Really look forward to catching up with Melissa and getting her thoughts about the future of education. Welcome, Dr. Melissa Bordogna.
Thank you, Paul. It's very nice to be here.
I got your name right this time.
Absolutely. It's not an easy one. So.
Yeah, so we're here at the Faircraven Cafe, one of your favourite cafes?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, because it's part of the Fairhaven organization, and they do a lot of good work with helping individuals living with disabilities here on the Central Coast in terms of employment, training, support, and so I like to come in and have a cup of coffee from, well, I can here and there.
Fantastic, and support a good cause, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
All right, so I've got a few questions for you today. You spoke at the iDesign X forum that we were both at. You were there for, I think, one of the first sessions in the morning. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, it was a really great session, actually. I had 45 minutes to do a master class, which I joked it's like speed dating for master classes, right? But what we were looking at was engagement with e-learning scenarios, and the crux of it, while there was some how-tos in terms of the scenario building themselves, I really wanted to communicate this notion that there's a difference between having an engagement problem, or learner or employee, whichever, and having an experience problem. And so that was really the focus of it, because so often we're looking at how do we get learner engagement, how do we get employee engagement, right? Yeah. And we're missing the point, because if we say we have an engagement problem, that means the problem is with the people. And I like to think that we actually perhaps have a workplace design or experience issue, or how we design the learning experience that isn't creating the conditions for intrinsic motivation to flourish. So that was kind of the crux of it, and then I went on to give some how-tos about, okay, well, if we start with those assumptions that we're looking at designing experiences that motivate us, then this is how the scenario planning would play out. Okay,
it's really interesting. So it really is going to the cause and not the effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. In regard to the Internet of Things, where everyday devices are interconnected, do you think this will continue to grow, or do you think there'll be too many security concerns around that?
That's a really good question, and I think it's both and. I do think it will continue to grow, and as many things with technology, we're going to be rapidly trying to catch up with security and policy and those kinds of things. It's actually very interesting, just, well, not the Internet of Things, but a kind of a similar idea. I watched a program the other day, and they were talking about the security behind our DNA testing. So what I mean by that is, they have those kits out there for $99 you can find out your ancestry. And this program was saying and showed that while it's supposed to be anonymous and everything else, because we want to connect with our other relatives and in our ancestry, people can actually, with not too much of a difficulty, figure out who you are. And even though the DNA indicators and the numbers attached are supposed to be anonymous and everything else, so there are certainly security concerns, and I would say we could, extrapolate that out to some of the Internet of Things as it continues. And I know we'll all be doing our best to minimize security risks, but I think it will happen. So I think it's a both and, not an either or.
Okay. It's really interesting. I wonder if an adopted person could find their parents.
That's a really interesting idea to explore. Well, what they were suggesting is it's the fact that they do the DNA testing, and then by choice, people are then tapping into the social networks to then find the other people. So if you're already out there and said, hey, look, this is my ancestry, or you my ancestor, then why not?
In an article you posted online called What is Your Life Theme, which I found really interesting, you said the following, so I'm going to read this out.
Okay.
I found that those who take the road less travelled see things differently. They think differently and thus they do differently. This road is not an easy one. Tell us how you see, think and do differently.
It's an excellent question, and I just need to qualify that and just say that I'm probably not the only person out there that takes the road less traveled, but compared to what most people would think is conventional, well, first off, let's look at the evident things in my life. I'm on the other side of the world. For me, a girl from a very small little blue-collar town east of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who most people never leave the state. So that is one aspect of it. So there's a bit more of an adventurous spirit, I think, in things. I was recently at a innovation summit here on the Central Coast, actually last week, and one gentleman was asking the question about, well, you know, if we have the future of work and everything's changing, and we're going to have this gig economy, then how does my son, you know, when it's time, borrow money and do all these things if they have multiple employers or contracts? And my response to that was, well, hang on, a lot of us have actually been doing this, working this way as what people are deeming the gig economy for quite some time. One example would be is how I carved out a career for myself in what is now being termed the gig economy. So often there's this fallacy that this gig economy is going to see us all being Uber drivers, right? And working for, you know, 20 hours a day for barely minimum wage. But that's not the case. I see, as an example, the gig economy being something where people create a career from having multiple clients, right? And if they do that within a company structure, then they can benefit from tax benefits and different things. But when I was at the Innovation Summit on the Central Coast last week, there was great concern about how people were going to survive and thrive and be able to borrow and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern around that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it comes down to, I see security very differently than other people, and I think that's kind of the crux of it. For many people, and I'm not taking anything away from them, security is the going to a job, having an employer, knowing that there's going to be a paycheck at the end of the week, having the sick days, and that's fine, but that's not the way I see the world. To me, that is the opposite of security, because I'm putting the control in somebody else's hands. So for me, security is on my own efforts, right? And that's scary and that's freeing both at the same time. So that would be an example of how I see, think, and do a bit differently. But then again, sometimes life circumstances dictate that you have to. Like we've talked before, I have 7 children, right? And a wonderful, amazing husband. When you have that many children to provide for, the typical job is just not going to do it for you, right? In addition to the fact that I'm on the other side of the world, so if I want to see my family, I have to think differently. If I want my kids to have a relationship with my mom and dad and siblings. So I had to take the road less taken, you know. And sometimes it was by choice, you know. Anyway.
Melissa, there's a lot of talk about machines taking people's jobs over the next 10 years. For example, I've heard about accountants won't exist anymore. It's just one area. So, however, I can't see machines replacing creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, actually, you've brought up a very good point. What they're saying in terms of the future of work is that anything that is a routine will be automated, or AI can take care of it. And it is these, what we would call either higher order thinking, or what I like to think is very portable kind of capabilities and skill sets, can't be, at least not at this stage. Okay, so even though, having said that, they're training an AI therapist in not so much emotional intelligence, but reading body language and emotion,
really?
And people were responding better to that than a traditional therapist. But having said that, those are the things that we really need to be focusing on. And there was a report, 2 reports, an updated one from a think tank out of the US that looked at what they were calling kind of future skills.
Okay.
And they had about 4 different category areas and about 10 or 11 different skill sets. And so while we, growing up, were taught critical thinking skills, they have actually fine-tuned those even more. So yes, you have critical thinking skills and analysis type of skills, but also things like novel and adaptive thinking, design mindset. So yes, obviously creativity is part of that, and what we're looking at is quite possibly, this is so big, honestly, but some of the more creatives in what we think is traditionally creative fields will probably actually flourish even more, because 1, people have more time to do it. 2, machines can't do it. At least yet, and I'm hoping never. So as much as there's scary things about this whole automation, AI, future of work, there's all this amazing opportunities and possibilities, because technology's always been there to help make our life easier.
That's right.
And so if the technology can make our life easier from taking the mundane jobs away from us and freeing us up as human beings to do some maybe amazing collaborations, and not just creative in the artsy kind of sense, but what the sky's the limit. Maybe we could solve more problems because we have time to think about them and work together.
It's like in business, you should spend a lot of time thinking about your business, working on your business, not in your business so much.
That's absolutely right. And when I taught university, and I would give an essay assignment to my students, and even when I taught them business writing skills and things, I said, look, most of your time is in the researching and the thinking.
That's right.
And then you read some more, and then you think some more, and then you think some more.
Yes, exactly.
Then you put the outline together. I mean, the writing, so many students just want to jump to the writing. And this is a similar kind of concept, is that it's about the thinking and the talking and the interacting and the strategizing even.
It's same with video production. A lot of planning beforehand to get it right on the day.
That's right.
It's the most important part of it.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And just going back to machines, I mean, they'll never be conscious beings. At the end of the day, they're zeros and ones. Basically, when it comes down to it. So I can see them doing a lot, but they're never going to replace our consciousness and our feelings and everything else that you
I certainly
spoke
hope not. There's all this talk of transhumanism. I can't even say it properly. Transhumanism, I think, is the term. Integrating our consciousness into the machine by 2050 or something like that. I don't know. That's the jury's out on that one. We can all be.
Melissa, we live in a rapidly changing world. So what are the key skills that learners need to keep up to date and to go into the future?
Well, again, excellent questions. There's a number of skills, but if I were to list maybe the top 2 or 3, I would say the first is resilience. Because the rapid pace of change is only set to increase.
Absolutely.
That we need to be able to adapt to the changes without being too psychologically disturbed by, okay, this was different, we've got to do this now, all these kinds of things. So this notion of resilience in the face of change, and we know as human beings sometimes change is really difficult. I know for me personally, I love change, but only if I'm the one creating it. So that sense of resilience. And I think the second is that we need to, if we haven't already, learn how to learn. And so a lot of people, experts out there are saying, well, the workers of the future, they just need to realize that they're going to be learning all the time and they're not going to stop learning, and that's just how it is in order to keep up to date. I think that statement is really interesting because it assumes that the workers of the past didn't continue to learn. I think we're learning beings, and we're always learning, unless we shut ourselves off in those very few cases. I don't think we're giving people enough credit when that's said. But having said that, I think perhaps it might be about more self-directed learning. Again, I think we've done that in the past, but sometimes we've waited for our organizations or our school systems to say, nope, this is what you're learning.
It's interesting because I asked on one of my other interviews, Mark Semahar's Director of Education at TAFE, so do you think Google is dumbing down our youth or helping them to learn more. And he basically said, yeah, he thinks it's a positive thing because there's so much information out there. It's just
one of those future skills, or I'm calling them future abilities,
okay.
And I added kind of to the list of the think tank. But one of that is new media literacy. And now media literacy is what we talk about. It's like, what's the source? How do we evaluate it? Is it biased? Where did it come from? Let's look at this. New media literacy is that, and then some in this new space. So I think that is something that absolutely we need to be really honing and teaching our kids. I mean, when I taught university, we would always teach our students, well, how do you evaluate a source? How do you know? And how do you look at that critically? So it's all part and parcel of that.
Absolutely. And just talking about adaptability as well, I think being adaptable is part of being young. And I think if we remain adaptable, then we remain younger as well. And also, older people usually don't like change as much either. So I think if we can learn to adapt and to face change and go with change, then it keeps us younger as well. I'm hoping so anyway.
I'd like to think so. Absolutely. I mean, in the generations that are coming up, they're going to be more accustomed to this change as well. And you think about, we're having a multi-generational workforce a bit more than we have had in the past, where people are, we have this longevity in terms of lifespans and in terms of our working careers, our working life, that even if we retire or stop one set of a work life, so many people are going on to use those skills and that knowledge and the wisdom that they've earned to do other things and to contribute in other ways. So I think adaptability is just part and parcel.
You've just become the Minister of Education for a day. So what would you change?
Before I answer that, I just want to acknowledge that all the amazing, hardworking, dedicated educators that are doing the job to the best of their abilities with the biggest hearts within a structure and a system that it doesn't always allow them to do what they know needs to be done, right? So if I were gifted with being the Minister of Education for a day, I would look at breaking down some of those overly restrictive structures. Personally, I don't believe in standardized education.
Okay, interesting.
I think we should be looking at the underpinning skill sets that we need in our young people for the future, not just disposable knowledge or technical knowledge, because that changes, right? It updates, it changes. When I was back in school way back 20 years ago now at uni, I was studying to be a public relations person, and there were certain ways to writing a press release. Now, that's changed. The underlying skill of writing hasn't changed, but the techniques on how you do media relations and all that has changed. So while those types of technical or disposable knowledge skills are important, I think we need to be really designing our education systems and practices on really honing those deeper skills and what I like to think of as the deep learning. So everything we've been talking about, critical thinking, computational thinking even, which is another one, novel and adaptive thinking, design mindset, things like cross-cultural, not communication, but competency. And that's a whole realm beyond just diversity training. It's really getting to know and understanding first ourselves and our own personal biases, and then looking and understanding the other, and then, oh, by the way, how do we work together? And notion of virtual collaboration. But before we can go virtual, we need to really understand how to collaborate. And I know that sounds kind of like, I collaborate all the time, and we do, and we probably do a pretty good job of it in most instances. But at the end of the day, I think we could do better. And that, again, it comes back to self-knowledge, knowledge of the other, and then knowledge how we work together. Not in skill, not just knowledge.
And it's really interesting. So the whole thing about cross-cultural competencies, if that was a base of education throughout the world, there probably wouldn't be any conflicts anymore.
Well, I'd like to think in an ideal setting. I think there'll always be some, but I think we'd be able to understand how to work with each other a lot better. So if I were to be the Minister of Education for the day, I'd be breaking down some of these overly restrictive policy structures,
Yeah.
standardization, and giving the teachers the ability to work with the kids as they need to be worked with, right? And open up that creativeness and go with where the children have their own kind of propensities and learn science through doing and learn math through the activity, not that sit here and this is how we do math. It's let's solve this problem. And oh, by the way, you're doing math, you're doing reading, you're doing creativity, you're doing all these things in there. And there's some school systems that do that.
There are. In fact, my daughter goes to a Steiner school,
Absolutely.
and that's very much in that vein.
And I think those are kind of brilliant and need to be expanded upon. And there's a place for a lot of these different structures, but I think our mainstream system is overly restrictive.
Melissa, do you think the standard of education in Australia is declining or improving?
I don't necessarily think it's improving or declining, and I don't have the stats to back this up, so someone out there might be better versed at this question, but I just think it's on a path that's not consistent to where we're going as a society, as a future, as the technology. There's a lot of people trying, there's some really good work that they're doing at the primary school level, recognizing what's coming down the track with the future. So the changes are happening, but I don't think they're going to be happening fast enough.
So thank you for all your wonderful insights today, and I'm sure that will be really beneficial to a lot of educators and others that are listening to this interview, and hopefully they'll write some comments as well. And how can people contact you, Melissa?
Well, they can contact me through LinkedIn if they look up Dr. Melissa Bordogna. Also through my email address, which is Melissa and it's Catalysis X. Who are interested, it's a funky spelling of the word catalysis, which means to add a catalyst. It's the process of adding a catalyst to something to instigate change. And my career has been taking different trajectories, and I like to, I think I'm helping people navigate the disruptions ahead.
Well, I'm sure, as I said, this information will be really beneficial and get people thinking as well, because the future is upon us.
It is upon us.
And we need to make a lot of changes. So thanks so much for your insights and for joining me here at your favourite cafe.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.